Your options were mostly 100 milligrams. They're probably a really sugary lemonade.
How is this all going to work? Because we have a lot of these restrictions when it comes to channels.
The answer was about 2 milligrams. That's about what an average person would metabolize in an hour. Someone like me could not have drank even, a tenth of that and had a good experience. These were we would joke, things you'd buy at a gas station in 1995. We are the largest raw importer of blood orange juice from Sicily. You pay quite a bit for a little bit of sugar water, and it keeps you from drinking alcohol, changing the way people socialize.
Hi, I'm Mike Gelb, and this is Consumer VC, where we talk about what it takes to invest in and build scalable consumer businesses. If you're enjoying the show, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a new episode. And check out the newsletter at theconsumervc.com for a weekly roundup of all the latest fundraisers, launches, and new episodes. Our guest today is Jake Bullock, who is the co-founder and CEO of Cann. Cann is a cannabis beverage brand redefining social drinking. We discuss the early days, what he was experimenting in his Stanford garage, to now scaling a category that once barely existed. Jake shares how Cann went from niche dispensaries to leading a national movement backed by celebrities and embraced by millennials and Gen Z. I love this conversation with Jake. This is such a great conversation about how he was able to expand the TAM when it came to cannabis beverage, what other players weren't doing, and some of the insight regarding potency. I thought that was particularly interesting. And just the overall approach to expanding the category was just really cool. But before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Glimpse. Glimpse is an AI-powered end-to-end deductions management service focused on recovering revenue from KeHE, UNFI, Amazon, and Target. For consumer brands, they centralize deductions with backups, they fully handle disputing on your behalf, the brand's behalf, and streamline the accounting process. So check out tryglimpse.com. Without further ado, here is Jake. Jake, thank you so much for joining me here today. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. So you started experimenting with Cann, or what became Cann, in your Stanford garage. What did you see about the future of cannabis beverages, and what you thought, and what did you think that most of the industry was missing at the time when it came to cannabis?
Yeah, there was a lot. I think there were probably maybe two really important things. The first was potency. So if you went into a dispensary 6-7 years ago before we launched and asked for cannabis beverage, your options were mostly 100 milligrams. They're probably a really sugary lemonade. And, someone like me could not have drank even, a tenth of that and had a good experience. Our insight was, well, what if you brought the dosing way down to something like 2 milligrams, right? Divided by 50. What happens then, right? And what we realized is it actually unlocked this amazing social potential. Why is that the case? Well, if you think about other mild intoxicants that we are familiar with, caffeine, alcohol, we drink them, importantly, but maybe more importantly, we drink them in micro doses. You don't really think about it this way, but there's a reason you can have multiple cups of coffee or, a few glasses of wine. It's because your body is actually metabolizing that intoxicant at a certain rate. And so we tried to figure out what the equivalent of that would be with THC and CBD in an alcohol alternative infused drink. And the answer was about 2 milligrams. That's about what an average person would metabolize in an hour. Now, obviously, you can build tolerances pretty exponentially. That's like why these 100 milligram drinks exist. But that was really important. Potency, no one was doing 2 milligrams. There wasn't any. I think we had some 10s. There might have been some 10s around, but even 5 was like a foreign concept 7 years ago. And then the other big thing was taste, right? I alluded to it a little bit with the sugary lemonades, but a lot of the early science around these drinks it prevented folks from making something that didn't taste the way that cannabis smoke smells, which is not a very pleasant thing to be drinking or sipping on, as you're like unwinding after a long day.
Taste, yeah.
Exactly. I actually still to this day, I have retail partners that will ask me, well, it's a weed drink. It's weed soda. Isn't weed soda supposed to taste like weed? And I was like, no, it's not supposed to taste like weed. And so there's still some education to be done on that front. But it was amazing how people would try to mask this taste with really, really high sugar levels, really, really high acid levels. These were we would joke, things you'd buy at a gas station in 1995, not really something that we should be drinking in the modern era. I was very much a consumer that would turn products and look at their ingredients. What's in this? Right before I even, decided whether I wanted to try it. And we did a similar approach. We said, well, we're making something innovative here. It's not going to be like, sparkling water, but with weed, or, beer, but with weed. It was going to be its own category. That's why we called it Cann. It's cannabis in a can, very on the nose. It's that 4-letter word. That's, one of the things that describes the category: beer, wine, can, right? And so we wanted the flavor profile to match that innovative sort of new category approach. And so we, had all these great rules. We used juice, freshly squeezed juice. If you could juice it, we juiced it. If you couldn't juice it, we would use an extract. So we pair really approachable citrus fruits like blood orange with maybe a little bit more adventurous, savory match like cardamom. Our blood orange cardamom is one of our most popular flavors. We are the largest raw importer of blood orange juice from Sicily. Sicily is the best place in the world to get blood orange juice. Again, part of what we did to make the product taste amazing. Those are the two biggest things that we saw in the market. And by creating an amazing tasting, low potency drink, it unlocked the social potential of this plant, of these products, and really became a real competitor in some ways to alcohol in a consumer's mind. Do I have to have 3 glasses of wine at the end of the night? No, maybe I'll have a couple can. I'll have just the same amount of fun, and I'll wake up with no hangover the next day.
Wow, that's really interesting how it actually was what your competitors were doing, or what the current category was, that it was actually 100 milligrams of THC, and then you're actually bringing down the actual amount to 2. Whereas in other categories, it kind of was the opposite, right? In terms of like, I'm thinking like energy drinks, for example, how it kind of kept raising and raising and raising throughout for more caffeine and what have you. Where this actually was, where you saw the opportunity was the actual opposite. Actually, let's bring it down. When you brought it down to 2 milligrams, I guess in terms of state or transformed state of person, what were you all kind of going for that landed on 2 milligrams that felt right for somebody?
If you think about alcohol, so we always tie things back to alcohol, right? Because that's sort of the world that we're playing in. We're a social beverage. We're an alternative to alcohol. And so the leading social beverages all are alcoholic. So we think about that as a good analog, right? And if you think about alcohol, you don't really get drunk from one beer or one glass of wine. Maybe there's a small subset of the population with no tolerance that might, but for most part, you don't, right? In some ways, what's powerful about alcohol is it's designed to be consumed incrementally. And that's part of what unlocks that social potential is you have one drink and then, it's time for another one, and it's time for another one. And that sort of process that, some people call it a ritual, is inherently social for all sorts of reasons. Right. And so we wanted to match that in terms of intensity. The buzz is different, right? Like alcohol's doing something slightly different in your body, having an immediate impact on cortisol. Some of that is psychosomatic. Some of that is actually like physiological. Your body's breaking that alcohol down into a lot of stuff, including some pretty not so good stuff. Where THC is different. It's working on your endocannabinoid system. CBD is working on your endocannabinoid system, which you have. And so in some ways, it's already a better natural pair for the human body because we're aware of it. We don't feel like we're being poisoned, which is good. Now, there is a metabolism that happens to the liver, and we try to keep the vast majority of that effect outside of the liver, because that's where you get the delta-9 THC that's really euphoric. It's sort of like uplifting. It's giggly. All the fun stuff you associate with weed and laughing with friends, that comes from the delta-9. Once you get in the liver, it breaks down into like hydroxy-11 and stuff that's more of the less fun stuff. People report feeling stoned. Edibles, things that with more surface area take longer to break down in the body, tend to end up more in that place in the liver. So when you'd ask sort of like, what's that effect meant to be like? It's really supposed to capture the gentle, floaty, giggly, fun part of THC and keep it in a bound box and not go off that cliff of anxious, paranoid, who's watching me? How am I behaving? Should I keep my eyes open or closed? Like those types of things we don't want to get anywhere close to. So the 2 milligram dose really does that. It ensures that you're keeping it in the fun part of the spectrum. And it's really mild. I mean, one 2 milligram drink is not going to be intoxicating for the vast majority of people. Right now, 6 definitely would be. So it also gives that control back to the consumer. If you're liking what you feel, you can increase the intensity by drinking more quickly.
That makes sense. And I mean, I imagine, given that, what currently was on the market and that it was 100 milligrams, really sugary lemonade, it wasn't very accessible, right, to consumers. As you said, it's just very, very potent. and not so great. And you obviously want to make this comparison and kind of go after alcohol, but also, of course, expand the market as well with just making it a lot more accessible to consumers with the 2 milligram. When you and Luke were building Cann, how did you think about making THC also more accessible and expanding the market? Obviously, it's much different to what's currently out there on the 2 milligrams, but you still had to purchase it in the same way, right? You still have to go to a dispensary. How are we able to kind of build up, make THC and Cann a bit more, not as like much more approachable than other products out there were?
Yeah, approachability was a theme in the early days. We talked a lot about this. As you're building a brand, one of the things that you toy with is sort of like, what does this brand stand for? Like, what is it trying to do? Maybe it's trying to do nothing, but if it is trying to do something, what is that thing, right? And approachability came up a ton because if you remember back when we were launching drinks in this microdose category, which didn't exist really, there was a lot of the like high class weed, like the Barneys of weed, and the everything was like super premium and expensive, and that was like this whole trend, and it was kind of insane and hilarious to watch because you're sort of looking at this being like, whoa, wait, this is like already been like a couple of years and we're gone completely off the rails. We didn't want to be that, right? Like we were not going to be, the brand is not a font, like a thin font, like no, that's not what we're doing. We want to be approachable. At the end of the day, these products change the way that you experience the world around you. We're selling you drugs. It should be fun. We can't take ourselves too seriously. So that was a big part of what drove us to making things approachable. Now, that said, there are times we're going to take an editorial stand, right, on product values. We're like, if you could squeeze it, we're going to squeeze it from a juice standpoint, right? We're not going to use orange extract if we can use orange juice. But there are also times when we want to make sure that we're kind of meeting this crazy world around us with a little bit of irreverence, a little bit of quirkiness. And so that really kind of informed the approach. I think that does a lot of work to help sort of erode any lasting stigma around this plant, right? Which there still is. I mean, still to this day, right? If you ask people in Los Angeles, not everyone goes into dispensaries. This happens, the entire country of Canada has legalized weed and people still don't go into dispensaries. Like, it's kind of amazing. Like, how did you do that? You kept the stigma intact somehow. I think largely it's because it's such a huge industry. There's so much diversity in the products. Like, if you go into a dispensary, there's things that you look at and you're like, what is that? That doesn't look like, I mean, I maybe know what cannabis flower looks like. It doesn't look like that. It looks like something else entirely with these waxes and chatters and all this kind of different things. And most of those products, the unfamiliar ones, are highly potent. So they're also like kind of dangerous, right? For an average person, a mainstream person with no tolerance. So all those things, I think, contribute to this lasting stigma. And what we tried to do is we tried to like kind of turn it on its head, right? We're going to stand up and make, strong political statements about cannabis normalization and social justice. Like, those things matter to us. We'll be more editorial in that approach when we do that. But there's also times where we're going to kind of like laugh at the hypocrisy of what we see around us. It's kind of wild, right? Like, the legal substance that, you're able to get everywhere in every bar, restaurant, sporting event, wedding, is alcohol. Like, that's the one we're picking to have everyone consume, right? Legally. That's kind of crazy. And so, I think we try to play off a lot of those themes in the early days in building the brand. And look, our best customers are alcohol drinkers. Like, we are inclusive in that sense, right? In some ways, what Cann really does is we're continuing the banner of a long line of alcoholic products that have tried to help people moderate. Beer, light beer, right? Like, now low ABV products, which are really popular on the market. Cann's another version of that. Our best customers go from drinking, 10 drinks a week to 5. That's pretty darn healthy and important in their lives.
No, that makes a lot of sense too. And I love how you say you actually flipped it on its head, and it was almost like a campaign, if it's fair to say, a campaign against alcohol. Like, let's actually unpack. Let's, like, sure, you want to unpack cannabis. Let's also unpack, alcohol as well, and why is this substance actually why is this like the drug that we're actually going to legalize?
It's the only legal one, right? Yeah, that's the crazy thing.
The only one. Yeah,
we think alcohol should still be legal. like I said, our best drinkers still drink it, right? But the question is, it seems out of balance. Like, how do we get back into balance?
Right, that makes sense. Well, apart from that being said, with the editorial and all of the kind of educational content that you've been producing when it comes to educating people about cannabis and obviously Cann, still, as you alluded earlier, a lot of people don't go into dispensaries, right? It's not like driving people into a grocery store, right, and buying a product. Dispensaries still, it's maybe a little bit unnerving. It's just something that people haven't experienced. What was your process to actually get people to actually go into dispensaries to actually purchase Cann?
Yeah, it was really hard for all the reasons that you're describing. We did crazy things. I mean, we would be like outside of Air One giving people free gift cards to a berries class if they would sign up to buy our product on Ease. Like, I mean, it was wild. Oh,
Wow, just so
like
much.
right
They have to do
there.
so much in order to
The idea was another example was we were there. We rented a space right next door to the Abbott Kinney MedMen, and we had people come in try uninfused versions of our product, and we sent them next door to buy a 6-pack of Cann. If they came back showing us they bought the 6-pack, we'd give them a free sweatshirt. Like these like crazy loops of jumps to get consumers basically from a normal world into the dispensary or onto the delivery platform. It was really challenging to do. Now, look, the stoners figured this stuff out right away. They were totally fine going into dispensaries and they could get on Ease and buy products, right? So it wasn't that. It was figuring out this mainstream person who we knew would love Cann. They're going to have 2 glasses of Chardonnay tonight. Like, how do we reach that person? That was really challenging. And that person, almost by definition, is like going to be the last person that's comfortable going into a dispensary.
And does the cannabis industry, does it actually have kind of like a 3-tiered system similar to the alcohol industry, where you have to have, the supplier, then you have the distributor, and then obviously you have the retailer? Or is it set up or is it actually set up like, or do you not have those restrictions?
Each state is a little bit different. They have those licenses. In some cases, the states allow you to own at multiple points of the value chain, which obviously on the alcohol side is not allowed. So there's some differences there. But in our business today, right after we sort of fully pivoted to hemp and liquor stores, it looks a lot more like alcohol, right? So we're spending more of our time in the alcohol world than we would ever imagine now, selling in liquor stores in 30 states, and we're only really still into the dispensaries in California.
So when you did pivot I guess before you pivoted your business from hemp stores and also places that sell alcohol, was the biggest barrier or generating demand, was still the biggest barrier actually getting people into dispensaries, or what were some of the other challenges?
Getting people in was a big one. There was about a 10 to 20% of the traffic that was interested in microdose. So we could kind of sell to them, or they knew somebody who was, right? A lot of the selling we were doing in dispensaries were like, you just made a product, may not be for you, but you may know somebody who thinks that you consume too much cannabis. Like, this is a product for them. We would do all sorts of, kind of backflips like that to get people to pay attention. And then, the other big challenge was the retail merchandising of these products were not what you would want, right? If you think about how we buy beverages, you're usually going into a convenience store, maybe a grocery store or a liquor store. They've got big refrigerated coolers around the perimeter or down maybe a refrigerated aisle. You've got huge stacks of these products unrefrigerated on the floor, in the middle of aisles, up against walls. You go into a dispensary and it's like there was one tiny fridge, and half the fridge was staff lunches and the other half were our drinks. It's like it just, beverages weren't even a factor in the approach, right? And they're, in most of these markets never got as much as 1%. And they weren't treated like a real product category in them, and largely for good reason, right? They weren't making the dispensaries money. They're expensive, hard to move around, heavy, take up a lot of space, and they don't get that much margin from them. So like, I don't blame them for doing that, right? This is part of the reason why we were able to break out of dispensaries and get actually these products where they belong, which is where just consumers make decisions about alcohol alternatives, which is alongside alcohol in the liquor store.
So that makes a lot of sense in terms of like the challenges when it comes to actually selling in dispensaries, and also where consumers are actually making their decisions when it comes to beverages. How did you approach, like, how has a regulatory environment, I guess, changed when you first started to now, like in terms of giving you access when it comes to selling in different channels, and I guess how has that kind of evolved?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we launched in California. That's where, it made the most sense to start. It was the largest state that had an adult use dispensary program. At the time, I think Colorado, Washington, and Oregon did as well. But California, from just a size standpoint, was so much bigger. So we said, okay, let's launch in these adult use dispensaries. And like you described, it's a highly regulated, at every step of the value chain, there's regulation, there's licenses. These licenses were really used as a way of restricting the market in these states, particularly in California. And so really expensive in the early days to get a license to make a product or to distribute it or sell it. And then the industry is also very, very heavily taxed as well. A lot of the programs were only, approved by the voters or by the legislator because they had, pretty aggressive taxation associated with them. So all those things created, pretty challenging dynamic, in addition to the things we've talked about, right? Like dispensaries didn't make a ton of money on low dose drinks. They only could make money on the 100 milligram ones. That's why they were there, right? And so our growth plan, like our regulatory environment that enabled growth for us, was we had to go into each of these new states and launch in their dispensaries and adhere with that set of pretty specific state by state regulations. The products couldn't leave the state once they were infused. Like once our cans were infused with THC by our manufacturing partner, they had to stay in California. Not only that, we never could even touch them. They would go from the manufacturer to the distributor. The distributor would sell them to the retailer. Consumers buy them at the dispensary level. And so it was highly, highly controlled. And the ability to grow required you to almost like add a new country, right? Every time you expanded to a new state. It was really challenging. I think we got up to 7 states before the regulatory environment changed. And that was sort of like the big shift that happened in this industry three years or so ago in Minnesota.
How did you think about scale with Beverage? Because I've interviewed other beverage founders, and obviously Beverage, it's a really difficult, just let alone taking into the fact that you also have all these regulatory issues going into cannabis. But in Beverage, it's a very, very heavy product, logistics and just shipping. That's going to be extremely expensive for Beverage. You really kind of need to get to a certain scale in order to become profitable, right? You couple that with having only a limited amount of retail options or channels to actually sell it. How are you and Luke thinking about, okay, how is this all going to work? Because we have a lot of these restrictions when it comes to channels. We're selling actually a really heavy product itself in Beverage. Like how are the unit economics actually going to work in order for us to get to scale? And what does scale even look like?
Yeah. These were all really big questions at the time, right? Especially when we're staring down the barrel of, a handful of dispensary markets where they're not bad markets, right? Like I have dispensary doors at our peak in the dispensary world that are better or as good as our best stores today in liquor stores, right? They moved a lot of volume. The problem was there weren't a ton of them, right? There was like 10 in Chicago and there were like, 10 in LA and then maybe 10 in Boston, right? And that's out of 75 in Boston or 70, maybe now it was 100 at one point in Illinois, 400 or so in California, although not all of them pay their bills. So you kind of started to see the growth levers really get contained by that. And then to your point, the operating costs of being in each of these markets, you never get to scale. Because even in California, which was our biggest market with the most dispensaries, we couldn't get scale, anything like scale economics on our tolling fees at the manufacturer or purchasing of packaging. You try to do universal packaging, right? So can we use the same boxes for all the markets and use the same cans? But then there are these crazy rules where Illinois requires you to put a warning logo, which has the marijuana leaf. But then California says you can't have the marijuana leaf on anywhere on the plant, on the package. And so like you can't do these types of universal packaging exercises. So the answer is you would never get to scale that way, at least not for a beverage. I think some of the other product could maybe figure out how to do it, but beverages were basically impossible to do that.
So the regulatory environment's changing. That was the massive unlock that were you able to actually get to scale first off, because I mean I can't even imagine you actually have to do different packaging. I mean, that's almost like a different SKU for every single state. So that's you can never buy in true bulk when it comes to your packaging as well. So without that, talk a little bit more about like the regulatory environment changing and if that kind of was the actual unlock that led to.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of an amazing story from a startup standpoint of a pivot, right? We usually think about these pivots as a bunch of sort of intellectual property value that's created in service of one channel or market that then gets shifted to another, right? we kind of
or like launching like a whole new product, or like changing the actual product
yes, like
itself,
what is it
right?
that we can leverage that we've already built that has a new application in a different way, right? And that thing could be a product, it could be some sort of technology, whatever. For us, we kept the end product the same. Like that actually didn't change. Our flavors, the effect, the potency levels, everything stayed the same. If you're a consumer looking at Cann Lemon Lavender that you bought in a dispensary in Abercrombie in Los Angeles, or the one we launched in Minnesota in liquor stores, it's the same. It tastes the same. The experience is the same. It looks the same, right? Now there's a couple tiny differences, right? Hemp derived, we've added a new compliance information, things like that. But to the consumer, the pivot, there was no pivot. What we pivoted was actually regulatory and compliance. We shifted regulatory structures. We said, well, if we extract the THC and CBD from hemp, Minnesota will let us sell in their liquor stores. Well, can we do that? Let's go figure out how to do that. So it became an operational exercise. Took us 60 days. We figured out we could extract the THC and CBD from hemp, infuse it in the products in Minnesota, and sell them in the liquor stores. And then it's like, okay, well, what other states have laws that are similar to Minnesota? Some already had them from CBD. They had existing laws on the books that regulated cannabinoids through CBD. Others passed laws in sort of the wake of Minnesota's exercise. And so we just started going state by state and seeing which ones had laws that we could comply with in this new regulatory regime. And that changed everything because, man, we could manufacture in one place and send all the products across the country. There's some slight modifications on that. There's a few markets where we have specific packaging, but for the most part, we can do that. That means we're buying in bulk. That means we're getting scale economics with the manufacturer. It means, we're working with freight companies that are moving the biggest alcohol brands. We're signing DSD relationships with the biggest alcohol distributors, beer network like Molson Coors and ABI and spirits like, Breakthrough Beverage affiliates. It's pretty amazing. It looks like we're now building an alcohol company. We're in 30 states. We're in liquor stores, predominantly independent liquor stores. Like our biggest customer today is Total Wine. But we're in 20 states with them in over 100 locations, and they sell amazingly well in those stores. So it's kind of an amazing example of how you can pivot without actually changing the product.
Yeah, that's wild. Pivoting instead of the product, you're actually pivoting your distribution channel because new distribution channels have actually opened up, and actually gives you a lot more opportunity to actually compete head to head against alcohol, or rather provide an alternative to alcohol where the consumers are actually shopping,
Yeah.
or making their purchase decisions when it comes to actually purchasing alcohol, which is really cool. How is there, even in the early days, because it seemed like part of the thesis was, hey, let's not, yes, obviously compete against the other canned THC products out there, but at the same time, because we're changing our dosage, we're making it a lot more accessible. It's really it seemed like it was more so a TAM expansion or a market expansion that you're all going for instead of trying to take share away from maybe current players. In the early days, was there a particular metric that you were tracking, or even just how are you thinking about making sure that, or seeing, hey, actually, we're actually getting customers that normally that weren't actually in this category originally, that have just expanded to this. We actually are growing the market. Was there a way to either like track that or realize that you all were kind of doing something right in expanding the market versus taking share away from competitors?
Yeah, it's a good question. And you're right that the focus was never really on share. I mean, we think about it a little bit now in the markets where our priority markets where we're focused. We think about relative market share, and we do that math and pay attention to it.
Yeah.
But it's not in the service of like traditional beverage share. Like you think about, these big beverage companies are so focused on share. That's largely because the TAM, that the distribution channels, the environment in which they can sell is pretty fixed. Like maybe you'll have a new liquor store open up in some market. It's, but like for the most part, like alcohol is everywhere, right? That's not the case for what was happening in our category. The way we actually saw what you're describing that was working, we were winning share, was we were winning linear feet in the liquor store. So we started out and it was like, oh, you have a tiny little shelf. It's okay. They boxed it off here. It's maybe like 4 feet and it's only half the shelf. And they have THC products and there's like some big signs warning the customers, these are THC products, right? Now we're talking about 24, or more linear feet in the liquor store. And that was amazing to see because you knew it was working, right? Because these are highly managed from a selling square footage standpoint. If we're winning share in the store, we're winning share of the overall sort of social beverage wallet. But then it was really interesting to see what are we taking share from? Like what's dropping off the shelf, right? And so there's a kind of a couple interesting things that happen. One, our case is more valuable. So the pricing is higher on these products than your average craft beer or RTD, kind of like cocktail product. And so that means that even at like ISO, like same velocities, you would prefer our products over similarly selling craft beer because we're going to be delivering more margin dollars because the case is more valuable. But then you look at the velocities and you say, wait, but our velocities are higher. Even like our worst performing SKUs are performing better than like the average craft beer. So then it's like, all of a sudden we start chipping away at largely underperforming craft beer and underperforming RTD, right? The top RTDs are doing pretty well, although we go toe to toe with the High Noons and the Long Drinks and the Cutwaters of the world in terms of our best SKUs. Whoop their best SKUs. So that's like pretty good. Now our big problem is we're available in 120 total wines, and they're available in 100,000 places across the country. So we're still way smaller on an aggregate basis because we don't have as many retailers or on premise or all those other things. But we're seeing, to your point, that change, that transformation. It's really becoming, we think, a new category. People talk about non-alc as a category. I think it will become a thing, but I think you will very quickly see these THC drinks eat non-alc. Just like we've seen to some degree RTD really eat at spirits, you're going to see THC really eat at non-alc because it's just a better version of that product, of what consumers are looking for when they grab non-alc.
So I guess to dive a little bit deeper on that, and obviously you're not biased, but in terms of cannabis infused or THC beverage product, even just microdosing products, maybe in general that are beverage, do you think that if you put that maybe in one bucket over here, and then the other bucket is maybe non-alc, what do you think will be the alternative for consumers? What do you think will be like a larger market overall in the next like 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard to predict these things. I would tell you that my hypothesis is that THC will be bigger than non-alc. Now, I could be wrong about that. Why would I be wrong? If there's some other compound, some other adaptogenic, some other, nootropic that actually delivers a buzz that people feel.
But there has to be, but I think to your point, there has to be a buzz in order for you, or there has to be something. There has to be that for you.
I think so. I mean, look at it on the alcohol side of things, right? Like people buy alcohol, like a lot of alcohol. Like everyone talks about, it's like the rates are down, young people are drinking less, all these categories down, which is true, but it's on the margin. We're talking about like single digits percentage declines. Millions of people drink alcohol every day. It's crazy. So, it's not down in that sense in terms of its control of the zeitgeist. And the reason is because of the buzz. What's actually happening here is you're finding alternatives that are emerging, like Cann, like others, THC drinks, other mild intoxicants that are providing real alternatives. And real alternatives means you actually feel something from them. It's probably good for me to have 100 milligrams of ashwagandha every day. But one, actually none of these products have 100 milligrams because it tastes horrible. And two, I don't really feel the effect of that. Like I'm not getting that immediate feedback. So it doesn't function socially the way I need it to. It doesn't function in that sort of altered state, the way if I want to unwind, like it doesn't serve any of those goals. And so the best goal that I can see that these non-alc products are doing today is, you pay quite a bit for a little bit of sugar water and it keeps you from drinking alcohol. It's like a social thing. You're like, okay, well, I'll drink this instead. And that's good. That's like, don't get me wrong. If you're drinking a little bit less booze, it's probably going to be good for your health. But you're not getting that full experience, that like the highest experience of a social beverage requires buzz.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I've been thinking about that as well in terms of the importance of buzz or is the buzz important? Period. I mean, thinking about, and it's just myself, like, so I stopped drinking around 2014, just because honestly, just really, it just made me sick, really bad hangovers. It's not to say I haven't been buzzed since. I have, or, I have had drinks since. I certainly have. But in 2014, I remember like that time, like going to a bar and being like, I just want water. And that's just kind of like what the norm kind of came for me, and didn't really, for me, just, I don't know. I'm maybe I just had stomach issues every time I had alcohol, but to me, when non-alc, when some of the more non-alc brands came in, I would taste it, and again, this is someone that is not drinking or maybe looking for alternative to drink. To me, I didn't. I would just still have water, like sparkling water or something else. I wasn't really that attracted to a non-alc because I wasn't kind of searching for that flavor. ever again. But again, that's just my own. That doesn't mean anything actually. That's just like my own kind of behavior. I do drink Cann. I really do like it. In terms of the feeling, but also the taste too. I really enjoy the
That's
taste.
great.
And really excited because y'all recently did. Is this recent that you or is this like an older product? The powder that you all launched,
It's actually a liquid.
or
Yeah,
liquid? Oh,
I
excuse
know.
me.
It's
Okay,
very
sorry.
often confused for powder because it looks like it could be in a packet, which is powder, but it's actually a liquid, and it matters because we affectionately call them our roadies, but in stores they're liquid packets.
Roadies. That's right.
And
That's right.
and they what's amazing about it being a liquid is you tear up in the corner, you pour it in, and it immediately dissolves. Like you don't with these powders you have to be like scraping at it with a spoon and trying to get it into the corners to like dissolve. That doesn't really work. The liquids are amazing. I'll bring like a roadie into a concert, get like a big beer, like a tall boy beer, pour the roadie into the beer, and it's amazing for 2 hours. You don't have to go back to the line. You don't need another drink. You feel great the next day. So there's all sorts of fun applications for these. People take them on planes. They take them on hikes. But what we just launched this summer is we launched our naked version, which is unflavored, unsweetened. So 0 calories, 0 sugar,
That's the
0
one. That's
hangovers.
the one.
And that has gone nuts. People, I mean, we was 4 times what we were expecting the sales. It's already sold out. We're trying to get it back on the site, but and into retail as well, because it's just so popular. People want to add this stuff to drinks that they already are making. Maybe it's a non-alc drink. Maybe it's an alcoholic drink. People do that as well. But it enables them to kind of choose how they want to consume it. And then also, doesn't add any sugar, or if they're worried about added sugar, or any calories if they're worried about calories.
Well, to that, how did you and Luke approach product innovation? I'd imagine in the early days it's also tough with SKUs because you actually have dozens of SKUs that they don't even want, in that you have different packaging that you have to comply with different states, so you have different types of packaging for each state. But I guess with that being said, how did you approach kind of like different flavor profiles, and then as well as what actually makes sense to launch that's quite different in the naked Highboy?
Yeah, I mean, look, in the beginning, we were always guided by this idea that we were creating something that was innovative in and of itself. So we were not going to go find a category that existed and try to make a version of that that's infused with THC and CBD. That was not what we're going to do. And that was kind of exciting and freeing, right? Because it gave us the ability to say, well, what, like from first principles, like what design a drink? What do you want to drink, Jake? Like let's have that conversation. And there were, if you think maybe 7 years ago, one of the things that we were astute observers of were these flavor trends. They would go in kind of cycles. And so, everyone wanted spirulina in their smoothie or whatever. There was like these en vogue ingredients. And so we were like, okay, how do we identify what is in vogue versus what is like going to become a new classic, right? That people like will actually drink. And we had some indications for that. There was this rosemary water that was on the market in the UK. We were obsessed with. And we were like, there's something so fun about drinking rosemary. This is crazy. We have to figure out how to incorporate this into our drinks. And we did, and it was with grapefruit, and it was inspired by cocktails that people make with grapefruit and rosemary. So we got a lot of inspiration from DIY cocktails and cocktail menus more broadly. But we had this theory that if people are trying to make this stuff at home, they must really want it. There's something there, right? They can't be wrong. If there's 100 lavender lemonade recipes online, like there's something to lavender lemonade. Let's go figure out what that thing is. And your initial reaction to that is like, well, wait, is it going to taste like soap? Like I think of lavender as like something that's in the bathroom. And we played with it, and we found out actually no, if you were really careful and restrained in your use of a lavender extract, it could be really beautiful, and it would play with the aromatics of lemon juice, particularly if that lemon juice came from Sicily, which is, we know, the greatest place in the world to get lemon juice because of the soil. The volcano Mount Etna has changed that soil, and it allows it to be much more aromatic. It pulls back on the acidity, and so you can really let those floral notes of the lemon shine, and they play amazing with the lavender. Throw in organic agave nectar from Mexico from some sweetness that lifts the whole thing up, and all of a sudden you have this amazing drink. It's 35 calories. It's a third of the lowest calorie alcoholic drink. It's light, refreshing, and gives you this really wonderful floaty buzz. That was kind of how we approached it, and we stayed in the lab, and we would work on flavors until we got them right, and almost to like a comical degree. Like we would be like, well, wait. We added one lavender drop and it got better. But what if the right answer is actually half of a lavender drop? Let's try that. And so we'd run it all back and see if was it better or worse, almost like an eye exam. And we found all these magical things happened with that approach. I think the reason that others haven't been able to replicate that, so many people go in to their formulation processes designing for an equation. It's like, it's got to have this much calories, it's got to have this many nut carbs, and I need this for that, and I can't be above this level for cost. I mean, we tried working with formulators, and they all like fired us because they were like, you guys won't listen to us. They wanted us to use stevia and monk fruit and erythritol, and they wanted us to use with other natural flavors because they're like, well, you can still put natural on the label, like, and it's like, okay, but like, have you tried this lime with other natural flavor like extract? It doesn't taste anything like lime. Like, I can get something that tastes exactly like lime. It's called lime juice, not from concentrate, freshly squeezed, right? Like, that's actually how we approached it. And so in some ways we benefited from not knowing anything. Like a CPG vet would be like, you guys are not going to make it. You're not going to have gross margin. You're not going to be able to scale. Like, we didn't know what we didn't know, right? So we designed almost like commercially impossible products that we loved. But our view was like, if we're going to fail, let's fail with something that we love, that tastes amazing, that we want to drink every day. Let's not fail because we create an average product that hits all the cost metrics and hits all the, net carb metrics. That doesn't make any sense. And I think that philosophy really served us well. The original formulations that we launched with are still the formulations today: grapefruit, rosemary, lemon, lavender, blood orange, cardamom. And then we have a rotating set of seasonals, which are amazing. You asked about Naked Highboy. Part of the reason we did an unflavored, unsweetened version in the Roadie liquid packet is because we refused to use stevia, monk fruit, erythritol, any of the fake sugars. We were not going to go down that road. And people actually, despite wanting no calories, they want sugar. Like, they don't want sugar free. They want the sweetness. Maybe they don't want added sugar. Maybe they don't want cane sugar or fructose corn syrup. Okay, great. But like, they want sweetness. And so it's really hard to deliver somebody sweetness, at least from our perspective, and not do it in a way that feels natural. And so we said, great, you can use a Naked Highboy, you can pour it in your Diet Coke or your, ice blue slushy, and we won't ask any questions.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I also really appreciate the fact that you use sugar. I mean, personally, like stevia, like sometimes my stomach just doesn't feel so great after having having products with stevia in them. Again, that's just me. What was your?
It's really awesome.
Yeah, it's like, I'll try products, and I really want to love the product. Like, everything else about the taste is great, but then after a few minutes, I just don't really feel that well afterwards. So I think that there's kind of an interesting balance that's kind of going on right now. So gross margin, because of course beverage, as we kind of pointed out, really tough category. You have to kind of get to scale in order to get any type of EBITDA. What was your approach to gross margin? How does it compare to alcohol? And is THC an expensive part of the actual product?
Yeah, all good questions. It can be an expensive part of the actual product, the THC, but we're microdose. So if we're making 100 milligram,
100, then it would be, but you're doing 2.
Exactly. So that helps us. It's also cheaper to make than beer, right? It requires no fermentation. This is like a batch mixing process. So this shouldn't sit in tanks. Honestly, you don't even really need tanks. You can do this all in line. So that helps as well on the manufacturing front. To your original question, we sort of ignored gross margin for the first 3 years, for better, for worse, right? The company needed to raise a lot of money to fund its growth because we weren't driving real meaningful gross margin. I mean, pretty low percentage gross margin for the first 3 years, if any. But we were trying to make it a thing, right? We're building a brand. We were getting distribution. We're doing all these other things. And so at some point it became clear that we needed to focus there. And once we started focusing there, we saw real gains. I mean, gains from the scale, obviously, that came from the expanding distribution channels and new markets and liquor stores in a number of states, but also just from smarter process improvements, right? Being able to manufacture with a little bit more notice is helpful. It's helpful with our partners. We can get orders, we can get them pre-sold, and then we can go build a real forecast. Then we can produce that forecast, something that looks more or less like a quarterly. We're still pushing to get to that schedule. We'll have months here and there where we need to have additional production as we grow. But those things really help because it allows you to align your purchasing. You can do it at scale. All those things that really get exciting with beverage don't really kick in. At least they didn't for us until you're past kind of like a 40 million run rate. And so it's starting to get fun. We're seeing that fixed cost leverage. We're seeing that scale. Getting gross margins up to 50% was a big win for the business. And like I said, it should be cheaper to make this stuff than beer. So you would expect us to have better gross margins than beer, probably more akin to RTD cocktails.
Well, do you tend to price to beer, meaning in terms of how you think about pricing? Do you think of it because of course you are in liquor stores or where people want to purchase beer and wine and alcohol. Is that kind of how you think about pricing?
It's probably how we will have to at some point, but fortunately today, consumers are willing to pay up for these drinks, and I think it's part of it is novelty, right? They're new, they're interesting, but also people are kind of like, wait, I can buy THC in my liquor store. Like this feels like I shouldn't be able to do this, so like I'm actually not going to ask any questions about the price. I think some of that's happening too, right? And look, at the end of the day, this should probably look a lot like RTD, I think, in terms of where pricing nets out in like a more steady state environment. But again, it's beverage, right? So the reason we can't have lower prices today is more to do with scale economics. We're still on that like bottom rung of the alcohol map, right? We're on the top rung maybe of the cannabis drink map, but we're at the bottom rung of alcohol. So there's still a lot of efficiency and savings to come from dramatically increasing our scale, and pricing I think will move along with that. Like, you know, it would be our goal to want to invest in price over time where it makes sense, right? To be competitive with the alcohol products that we know our consumers are thinking about, right? Right now, you know, the way you think about it is more just let's look at the category shelf and say, okay, you know, this is a premium product, so we're going to maybe be priced a little bit higher than the average. We've got Sicilian blood orange juice, Sicilian lemon juice, organic agave nectar, right? Like we're the quality of the product commands a slight premium, but we don't want to be left in the dust either, right? So it's a balance.
Got it. So you can actually sell right now premium to
We do.
alcohol.
It's yeah. There's a premium there. That's also what makes the case more valuable, right? So when you look at velocity numbers in this category compared to alcohol, and you have to look at a store by store number, right? Because in the aggregate, it all gets washed out by the fact that we're in such few locations relative to alcohol. But when you look at it on a store level, it's actually pretty remarkable what we're seeing from a dollar velocity standpoint, because that case is more expensive.
And I know you raised a lot of money throughout the course of Cann. I'd imagine in some ways you have to, because you probably don't have too much access to debt markets considering the category as well from the inventory financing side or anything. So you kind of had to raise your equity. But talking a little bit about like your fundraising process. Obviously, you have a number of celebrities kind of involved in the cap table and also funds as well. What was your approach to fundraising? How did you think about, you know, value add from either like a fund or any person that was interested in being involved?
Yeah, all good questions. We have had to raise a lot of money. It's you know, a combination of being startup beverage, layer on top of that natural beverage, layer on top of that highly regulated active ingredient, right? Your point about debt is exactly right. There is not like a well-functioning sort of working capital. You know, we have some, but it's
solution.
Yeah, exactly. Not like if we were a soft drink company, right? It would be a totally different conversation. So those have all created really challenging dynamics. And I would add a final one, which is traditional venture is hesitant to step into this category, right? If you think about it, if you're like a big growth fund that would be looking at a beverage of our size and scale, you're kind of saying, well, we don't have to invest in companies that might be banned. You know, like there are enough companies out there to invest in that don't have a threat of ban, even if that is really, really small, right? Less than 1% of a chance. And we actually think, you know, the writing's on the wall and it's all headed in this direction. And there's so many positive signals. Like it's still like, I think constitutionally really hard for these sophisticated growth investors to get comfortable until they see, you know, a lot of evidence that nothing's going to change. And so you don't even have that as an option, which should be the right kind of like what if like a healthy functioning venture market should work. Now, at the early stage, I think there is a lot of opportunity and there's capital being deployed. It's largely because there's a lot of capital there to be deployed. And so, you know, we were, I think, lucky in some ways because we started in sort of zero interest rate environment and we're able to manage and run the business for a few years in that environment. So raising capital, you know, at the time seemed really hard, but looking back now, it was way easier than we realized. And we were able to, you know, raise money from investment funds that had mandates around cannabis or infused beverages or social beverages, things like that. You know, we were able to raise money from big consumer funds that were willing to take the risk, right, and get into the space. Also high net worth individuals and celebrities, like you mentioned. The celebrities really found us in Los Angeles and they fell in love with the product and they wanted to be part of the journey. So we were really open to bringing those folks on and have been amazing investors to the business. We treat them like investors and they are. You know, they sent us checks to participate and be equity holders in the business. So that's kind of cool. To your question about sort of, you know, what do you look for in the value add side of things? I think there's a couple of answers here, right? Like there's like the cynical answer, which is like venture investors don't really provide that much value. they'll try to sell you on it. And a lot of what they try to sell you on is their network. Oh, we'll get into, it's like, okay, fine. But
Has that been true for you all? Has that been true for you all with your cap table?
I would say we've been really lucky to find good partners that have, tried to help the business in the ways that they can. But it's more a point to founders that like don't have high expectations of your investment, right? Like it's the goal here is not that you take their money and they also run your business or transform your right. Like you're mostly taking their money. And you want them to be supportive and helpful and understand the strategy, and like all of those check boxes as you're dating a potential partner are important. But I think there's so much pressure put on these venture investors to be like wildly helpful. It's like, I don't actually need you to be that helpful. Like, I can probably get intros to most people. Most people can these days, right? With technology and LinkedIn and things, it's not that hard to find people. What you can really do to help me is a set of specific things, right? Maybe there are certain relationships that you can manage because you manage them better, right? When I talk to growth investors today, I'm very interested in how you manage Kroger, Albertsons, Costco, Walmart, Target, Whole Foods, right? Like that, like how many brands have you gotten in there? Who do you know there? How do you manage the sets? What are the processes there? Like that's going to be really valuable for my business in the next 2 years, right? So, more tactical things like that, I think you can use as selection criteria. But, I think a lot of times folks come in and say, oh, well, I know this person, I know that person, I know this person. Like I'll intro you to them all. Like that's not really value add, maybe it speeds you up a little bit, but it's not a ton. I'm not entirely sure if that's like true of everybody. I bet there's some great folks out there that are really value add, but I would say that be really focused on your strategy and what you want to do with it, and find the partners that believe in you and support that strategy. And that's all you really need. Take their money and then go execute.
No, totally. And I'd imagine too on the value add side that what also could be valuable on the money side is, hey, when we're raising the next round, if you can also maybe exercise your pro rata option, so it doesn't actually look like you actually don't believe in our business. That would also be
yes
on the money
downstream
side.
access to capital is the single most helpful thing an investor can provide you. I completely agree.
What does success look like for you in relation to Cann? Being acquired by a big alcohol company, going public, or remaining independent?
I get asked this question a lot, and I always struggle with the answer because they feel to me like, regardless of any of those outcomes, selling the business to a big strategic, taking it public, continuing to operate it, it doesn't actually change to a large degree what we're doing every day. There's some slight modifications, right? If we're keeping this thing independent or running it as a public company, you may make some slightly different bets in terms of like, down the roadmap from a product standpoint or a growth standpoint. You might choose slightly different partners if you knew who your potential acquirer was going to be. But we're not, one of the benefits of this business today is there are a lot of potential acquirers, right? You could tell yourself a story about beer. You could tell yourself a story about spirits. You could tell yourself a story about big multi-state cannabis operators, tobacco operators, energy, non-alc, right? Companies that have gotten pretty big. There's all sorts of potential acquirers. So in some ways we're sort of burdened and also freed by that, right? So there's not a ton of strategic decisions that you would make other than build a great business. Like what does it actually take to build a great business? If you build a great business, then someone's going to want to buy it. There's going to be pressure to take it public, I imagine, finance it that way, or continue to run it independently. And like we've been talking a little bit about, Beverage gets really fun when you get big. Like the hard part is the beginning.
Yes.
And so, I want to stick around for the fun part.
No, it makes sense. I guess also, I guess to maybe piggyback on what you said, success, what it looks like is whatever's kind of in some ways best for Cann, and actually keeping Cann, running. Is that being is that being acquired? Is that going in public? Is that remaining independent? What actually like what success is actually what's actually maybe best for the business, or what you think is best for the business. Not to say a big company might then shut down Cann, right? Or something. But what you think in the moment is actually the best kind of decision for Cann moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's right.
If Cann fulfills its mission, how will American drinking culture look different in 10 years?
It's a great question. When we launched Cann, we had this idea. We talk a lot about, what is our mission? Like, what are we really trying to accomplish here? And we kept coming back to this concept of, well, we're really changing the way people socialize. Like that's the big idea here, is like there has been a monoculture for 100 years of how we socialize, and it's one way, and it looks the same, and it's behaved the same largely for those 100 years. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to, in sort of a subversive way, blast that monoculture to bits. And products like ours, and really only products like ours, I think can do that, right? In providing people alternatives. And then the future state we want is not one where alcohol goes away, right? We would often talk about there being beer, wine, and can at every social occasion. And that really stemmed from this idea that, 30 years ago, you pick up some beer, you pick up some wine, you have a party, right? Maybe the guys drink the beer more and the gals drink the wine more. Maybe that changed a bit. All that's shifting, right? We saw this with hard seltzers. It was, pretty broadly applicable across, sort of gender and age range. It was kind of amazing. People like these things. And then RTD cocktails came in and they're like a better version of hard seltzer. And so then it's like, wait, now people are all grabbing High Noons. And actually, you don't even need beer and wine. You can just bring High Noons and it's a party. And so like, what does a party actually consist in? And I think what we want that a component of that to be is Cann, right? Now you have to pick up this product because you've got your friend that doesn't drink, or they're sober for this month, or it's sober October. Okay, great. Who am I picking this up for, right? Maybe everyone's doing it. Maybe some people are, but it's now to constitute a social event. You actually need this option, this alternative to alcohol to really make it a party, and that's our vision. I think we will get there faster than 10 years. So maybe I should be more greedy. Maybe in 10 years, this will be a category that's akin to the size of RTD. I think it's possible.
Got it. Yeah, that's great. Really, really excited for the next few years look like. We're gonna do a lightning round if that's all right. I'm gonna ask you a short question, and then we're gonna do short responses, and then we'll conclude. Is that all right?
Sounds
with you?
Great.
Cool. What's the most underrated skill? Oh, and by the way, I mean, if it's also longer, that doesn't necessarily have to be short. But what's the most underrated skill or habit that helps you succeed but gets rarely talked about?
Ooh. Humor.
Love that. What's the biggest misconception about cannabis beverages in one sentence?
Ooh. I think it's that they taste like the way cannabis smoke smells. They don't. Many of them can taste amazing.
That's great. Is there any one celebrity investor story that you can share that shocked you?
My favorite one is going into the Goop offices in Santa Monica. We started the company in Venice Beach, meeting Gwyneth Paltrow and some folks from her team and pitching her on the business. I mean, it was amazing. It's a beautiful office. It's this major media CPG empire that she's created. And you're like in this meeting, and she's also this crazily famous, Academy Award winning actress. It's sort of like all these things are happening at once. It's like, is this my real life? And, we somehow convinced her to invest. I think it was like an amazing, like beautiful mind math that she has on evaluating products. And I think it was our liquid packets, the Roadies, that really got her. She's like, I can see myself pouring these in a cup of tea before bed and drinking them. And it's like, great. Okay. Come on board with us. This is going to be amazing.
That's awesome. Love that. What's over the course of Cann, what's the biggest thing you've changed your mind about?
It's hard because there's so many things that we've changed. I would say recently one of the biggest this year was we launched a 10 milligram. I mean, we were the brand that went to 2, right? I cut it in divided by 50. We weren't going to be in the high dose, and we believe 10 is pretty high, right? But there was such a clamoring from consumers, and we got to the point where I was sitting there thinking, well, it doesn't seem fair that people that want to drink 10 milligrams of THC should have to have bad tasting versions of those products. Like, we can make them a great one. And maybe we should, because the thing is, they wanted our flavors. They wanted it to be Cann. They wanted the Cann blood orange cardamom 10 in a 10. And we're like, oh, it's a different brand. It doesn't make sense. Marketing 101 is telling you this doesn't work. But we ultimately changed our minds on it and said, look, consumers want this. They're the early adopters. We kind of ignore the early adopters to some degree as a business because they're the highest potency, kind of like, higher tolerance folks. And we said, great, let's make them the higher boys. And we did, and they love them.
What's the craziest mistake you made while scaling Cann that taught you the most?
Oh God, we made a bunch of mistakes. At one point, we tried to spin off our marketing team and make a joint venture with a video production firm in Hollywood, and like it was going to be this great like engine of brand growth, and it made sense. Like I promise you, at one point it made sense, but it did not work for all sorts of reasons. And so that was probably the most obvious mistake. We had to unwind it, and thankfully we were able to unwind it, and it allowed us to focus, I think, on what we were really good at, and what the business needed. But that was kind of a fun triple backflip that we did not land.
Wow. What's one mindset shift that completely changed the way you operate?
One of my favorite ones is, I came from sort of a culture in all my prior jobs, right? I was an investment banking analyst, management consultant, a private equity investor. That was a very sort of interrogative culture, right? Like you're coming with information, somebody's trying to get that information out of you, and you're almost like in conflict as you sort of debate or go back and forth on this information. And I think what I've realized in operating a business like Cann is so much of what I do every day is actually about trying to learn. I'm more of like a scout. There's a great book called The Scout Mindset that goes into this, where it's like, how do you learn about the situation, the dynamics, what's going on, asking questions in the right way to get that information. If you come in really with like an intense interrogation style, folks tend to like clam up, and they're as a result are less likely to actually give you the situation, the information, the dynamics that we need to make a really good decision as a team. So I would say that that's a big shift, thinking about it's not my job to pull information out of people as much as it is to create the circumstances that they feel comfortable to offer that information.
That's really helpful. Looking back, what's one thing you wish you knew before starting?
Oh my God. Honestly, so many things, like beverage economics. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like there's so many things that we didn't know that had we known, we probably wouldn't have even started this company, or we would have done it differently, right? We would have like started a supplements brand, and then we would have like built it to 80% gross margin and 10 million online. And then we would use that cash to launch the beverage. Like there's a lot of better ways to build a beverage brand than just make an amazing product that's expensive and no gross margin, and then just force it onto the world with like zero interest rate venture dollars. But it works to some degree. And so, I'm glad we are where we are, but we probably would have never done it if we knew the answers to some of those questions.
Do you think you could have started Cann today, considering the current environment?
We probably could have started something similar to it. I think we would have made a set of products that were as good from a flavor experience standpoint. I don't think we would have the brand. I think there's something magical and valuable in what buying Cann says about you. And it only comes from the history. It only comes from, the music video that we did, 3 summers ago as a Pride campaign starring all these drag queens, right? Or the holiday video that Kate Hudson and Baron Davis did for us a few years ago, right? The product collaboration we did with Tovlo, the music artist, that was Peach Passion Mate, and like featured all these amazing video clips of her and her butt, which she wanted. And then we were kicked out of dispensaries in San Jose because they said that it was like too salacious. Like those things all add up to a sort of a zeitgeist, like body of movement around this brand that maybe someone that just discovers us this week will never know. But the people that were our very first customers, our most loyal customers that have been doing that like frontline word of mouth marketing for us, that's what has got them so excited and engaged around the business. And that just takes time. It takes showing up. It takes being in communities and markets and working with your partners face to face, which is really hard to do on an accelerated basis. And if we started today, we'd be starting over fresh on that front.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Totally fair. What's one book that's inspired you personally, and one book that's inspired you professionally?
Oh, wow. Great question. My favorite professional book is this book by Don Keough. It's called, I think, The 10 Commandments of Business Failure. It's a quick read. You can do it on like a short flight. But I met with him. He was at the time the chairman of the board of directors of Allen & Company when I started my first job out of college, and was just blown away by his knowledge and experience, and many of it in beverage, actually, Coca-Cola and some others. And it's a fantastic business book, and really reminds you like of how the very many ways you can fail. And that's actually quite easy. And it's how you learn from those things and prevent those mistakes going forward that really builds you as a business leader. So I love that one. It's one that I go back to and remind myself of quite a bit. And then, I don't know, there's so many great books that have affected me personally. One of my favorites is The Sun Also Rises. I think there's like an amazing, not to be like in crazy tripe about all this, but I do think that there is like there's something about that time and place in the world, and how people were behaving, and what it really meant to be social, and the way that they communicated with each other. I laugh a little bit because so much of it, there's alcohol is such a feature in that world, and so I sometimes like to wonder like what it would have been like had you had products like Cann, at the turn of the century after the First World War. Just kind of like a fun thought experiment.
I really thank you so much for these. I think we've had a couple folks mention the 10 Commandments of Business Failure. I don't think we've had anyone mention Son of Rises. So very original.
Amazing.
And that's amazing. Jake, thank you so much for your time. This has been so much fun.
I've enjoyed it. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. And there you have it. It was so much fun having Jake on the show. Jake, thanks for coming on. Thanks for tuning in. Check out the newsletter at theconsumervc.com. And thank you to Glimpse, our episode sponsor.